Okay, we're recording. And I'm letting everybody in.
Gonna give it a second as people roll in. All right, well, welcome. My name is Sarah Pearson. I am with the Boca Chamber, and I am thrilled to have our speaker with us today. Welcome to our virtual presentation entitled Re-Entering the Workplace and Insights Regarding the Workplace of the Future. I know one of the most amazing things about the pandemic has been what possibly can be a change for a long time when it comes to commercial space and the way people are working in their buildings and their workplace. So I've had some really amazing conversations with our speaker, Bob, a couple of times now in the last couple of months, just hearing, it's so fascinating to hear how these changes are happening at the very high level, very large corporations, all the way down to small mom and pop workplaces. So I'm excited about the presentation. I do want to say we are recording today's presentation, and it will be available on our YouTube channel in the future. We also, if you have a question, if you scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's something that says Q&A. You're welcome to type a question in there, and at the end of the program, we will ask our questions to Bob. And so without further ado, I'm actually going to read Bob's bio, and then we're going to have a quick survey question that's going to pop up for you to answer, and then he's going to go right into the program, and there might be another survey question that pops up during the program as well. So Bob Schneiderman, SIOR, is an executive managing director at Colliers International, specializing in advising tenants and occupiers on their commercial real estate matters. He has an extensive background in working with both local, national, and global corporations. He has over 30 years of experience in the commercial real estate industry and offers creative solutions to better align his clients' business objectives with their real estate. He has completed more than 2 million square feet of leases, valued in excess of over $750 million, along with sales valued at over $118 million throughout his career. He is a true veteran of the industry. He has earned a reputation of professionalism, diligence, and attention to detail that enables him to deliver a superior level of results for his clients. I did look up SIOR, and I must say, as a realtor in my past, I have a tremendous amount of respect for people that are in the commercial industry. Very different, very difficult, I guess, position to be in. A lot of contracts, a lot of legalese and whatnot. And you really need to be a specialist in commercial to be successful. The SIOR stands for Society of Industrial and Office Realtors. Very impressive. I looked that up. Not a lot of brokers have that designation. He also serves on the executive cabinet of the American Heart Association. I think it's amazing. He gives back to our community quite a bit. He's a trustee at the chamber, at our chamber. He has spoken at our Economic Development Committee on real estate trends. And I am, again, thrilled to hear from Bob today about what we can expect moving forward. So I think, Chastity, if you can throw on that survey question, and then we'll get right into Bob's presentation. Thank you.
So the question is, where are you currently conducting work from? Are you conducting work from home, or are you conducting work from the office? We'll give it a few seconds. A couple more people are answering. Okay.
Ooh, 50-50. All right. So without further ado, Mr. Bob Schneiderman.
Thank you, Sarah. The new norm, masks. I guess everyone's starting to get used to this. I can take mine off because I'm here in my home office by myself. Don't have to worry about social distancing or any of the other stuff right now. I also want, thanks for the introduction, Sarah. I also want to add almost a quarter century now in Boca, and I've also been a commissioner on the baseball Little League and coached my kids throughout the years. So it's great to be here and certainly look forward to sharing information with all of you. So the purpose of today's virtual event is to provide you information and resources so your company can be the big winner in these uncertain times. No one can possibly see all the options, and my job is to show you the ones you may have missed, as those may be the solutions that matter. We're all in this together, and unfortunately, not all of us are yet aligned and heading in the same direction. So why is this all important? In the face of potentially 4 large crises occurring during the same year, we have a health crisis, an economic crisis, a political crisis, and now even a social crisis. It's more important than ever to have a plan. We've seen other individuals and firms get in trouble without having a plan and thus making rash decisions. So having a well thought out plan will greatly enhance your odds for success. In dealing with such massive uncertainty, a plan is the one thing that can possibly guide you. Therefore, it's certainly worth the effort. So here are a few key points that your plan should cover. How to re-enter the workplace safely and protect the health and well-being of the employees and the owners, and the key changes needed to the workplace going forward. Next slide, please. So here are the 6 main topics that our discussion will cover today. The impacts of social distancing on office space, what's happening to my space now, and what we will need to do prior to going back to work full-time, workplaces of the future, and what changes owners and tenants should implement, results from the Colliers Global Work From Home experiment, select results from the Gensler Architectural Survey, and then I'll share with you some re-entry recommendations that we put together. So if everyone's all set, let's get started. My plan is to touch on each of these 6 items and allow for a short exchange before moving on to the next item. So we can make this conversation as interactive as you all want it to be, or I can certainly keep going. And then once we get through all the material, we can have a conversation from there. So first slide is up. So let's talk about the impact of social distancing and what's that going to have on our offices and our spaces going forward. The world is certainly going to be a different place as we all move forward together. You know, old habits from the past, like shaking hands, large team functions, group meetings, retreats, and conferences, or folks just simply hanging out in a break room or around the copier are going to be needing to change in order to move forward safely. If people don't make changes like more frequent hand washing or stop being too close to each other and modify some of their behaviors, we may need further dire actions like longer stay-at-home orders. We need to also be very thoughtful about getting back to work. You're going to need to create a culture of cleanliness and lead by example. Building owners can address additional janitorial measures and changes for buildings, but each firm is going to need to determine how to incorporate these changes into your space and into your culture. So some examples of what we're going to see differently is like I started this meeting, probably going to be the new norm. Over in Asia, it's been adopted for a long time. People have had masks on, but we're going to see probably, at least in a short run, more frequent masks by more people, gloves, and possibly different materials on clothing. Certain materials will allow breeding for certain germs, and other ones might prevent it from happening. The way we work is going to be different as well. Densely populated plans of the past will soon change. And also how we interact together is going to change. So that is the first topic. Do we have any questions or comments regarding that? And just note, a lot of this stuff interrelates. We can certainly pause here, and if not, let's move on to the next slide. What's needed prior to going back to work?
Yeah, I don't see any questions yet, and I'll keep a tab on the questions. How's that? So then we'll keep going, and then I'll interrupt when there's things that pop up.
Perfect. Okay.
So,
All right, so let's go to the next slide. What's needed prior to going back to work? In the new changing world, change is necessary to move forward safely. If people jump the gun and return to work before it's safe, we may end up making things worse for ourselves and create additional problems or additional setbacks or delays to the economy. Here are some of the key points that I've learned on numerous Zoom calls with global tenants, as well as some leading architectural firms. Colliers International, my firm, hosted a webinar or Zoom call. We had, I think, maybe 3,000 people on the call, and we had 4 of our global clients, commercial real estate executives from representing the industry. So we had Nestle, Nokia, PepsiCo, and ServiceNow. Additionally, I was on other calls where we heard from firms like Cisco, DHL, and Oracle. So you can get a sense of the magnitude of these corporations. And they all shared their ideas, and many of them had different feelings and ideas, but here's some of the things that came up. So many employees are uneasy about returning, and some employees are flat out still depressed about this whole pandemic. So certainly employee behavior is going to change. The way we work is also going to change. A sea of densely populated cubicles and even benching, which has been implemented recently to increase densities, have to be modified in order to prevent further spread. When I first started in the business, the normal was approximately 250 square feet per person. You would think 4 per 1,000, and that's how you figure out how much space a company would need. Nowadays, over the years, everyone wanted to do more with less square footage, and that drove up parking ratios, demands on buildings, and the ratio per person per square foot was pushed closer to between 100 and 150 square feet. More than likely, we're going to see a shift, and it's probably going to go back in the direction of 250. I'm not so certain it's going to head all the way there, but you can certainly expect some changes. Testing and a vaccine should become the norm over time, but as we all know, both are out of our control and are being developed. And if there's any way to bring these things to market quicker, I'm sure they're going to try to do it. But again, we got to worry about safety. And lastly, contact tracing apps. Additionally, thermal cameras are going to start to be used on a wider basis. They're going to be implemented to measure employee and visitor temperature at entrances. However, HR folks are starting to speak up about privacy concerns and how this could impact an organization. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind. Additionally, companies are going to start offering PPP, personal protection equipment, to employees. Removing chairs from conference room is going to help decrease density. Break rooms may even be temporarily closed, so people aren't sharing microwaves, they're not sharing refrigerators. We've seen other companies and many companies put painter's tape or eliminate some workstations to decrease densities. People are staging their workforce, and they're allowing the critical folks, or some are capping it at a percentage, to come back to the office first. Many firms are putting signage and reminding folks to wash their hands more frequently and putting lines on floors for spacing. You're going to see those in buildings and restaurants, common areas and office space. And also there's going to be a great emphasis on touchless. You're going to see touchless sinks, soap dispensers, doors, elevators, and lights. I've seen on social media, I was having a conversation with someone, and probably within a day, I've gotten all these ads pop up for brass pointing devices. People are going to start seeing that as the norm. I had a tour last week for the first time, and my client actually had one in his pocket. Brass is antimicrobial, unlike aluminum that harbors viruses. So these devices fit on a keychain. It's probably about 3 or 4 inches long, and it enables you to touch buttons and grab handles and open doors without putting your hands in direct contact with anything. So it's kind of interesting, and I'm sure you'll be seeing these things soon as they'll become more mainstream. That is the second topic. Are there any questions before we move on to the next slide on what's needed prior going back to work?
I do not see any questions yet.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Workplace of the future and what changes owners will need to implement. As I mentioned, both employee behaviors and the way we work will need to change. Landlords that get that will retain tenants and attract new ones. They can't also charge tenants 100% for these changes because, unfortunately, some of the changes do have significant costs and can raise operating expenses quite a bit. And there are other changes or modifications which are low cost, which shouldn't have that big of an impact. Historically and up till recently, rates in the Boca Raton area have been rising. We are expecting to see some pressure on rates, and rates may even come down. However, if landlords start trying to raise their operating expenses, some of which are already in excess of $15 per square foot, that's going to make certain buildings uncompetitive or less competitive. And some of the changes we'll get into later, especially dealing with air conditioning and filtration, I've seen budgets that have projected these costs to potentially raise operating expenses by at least $1 a square foot. So here are the key points. Some of the changes you'll likely hear about or see, and some of these items I have pictures which we'll show you later when we go to our re-entry recommendations, are touchless entrances. There's going to be these nanoseptic stickers, which are self-cleaning stickers that people can put on handles if they don't want to put occupancy sensors or touchless remote entries. You're going to see more occupancy sensors. Boca code has changed. You know, it is required now if you do a new build out to have occupancy sensors in offices, but you're going to see different types of sensors. There's a company called Untitled, which is an innovator here, and they have smart sensors in ceilings which integrate with the air conditioning, with the lights, and they can certainly help make a building run more efficiently and keep costs down. Many CBDs, many larger cities, and many major office buildings already have buttonless elevators. You show your badge, your employee badge, it knows what floor you're on, and it takes you directly to your floor. The elevator lights up, you know which elevator to go in, and you don't have to touch any buttons. I'm not so sure we're going to see that in many buildings here because a lot of the buildings are smaller, but certainly it's something that's going to exist and it's going to continue to happen. There's going to be new antibacterial and antimicrobial products introduced. There's going to be foggers, UV light disinfecting. There's a product called Spray MicroShield 360, which is a disinfectant. Many airlines I've read have already started using this in airplanes. It already puts a shield over the seats and the flooring to prevent the harboring of biogens. You're going to see enhanced building janitorial, and company-specific cleanliness items like sanitation stands will likely be integrated into the workplace. I know in our own space, we created stations and have wipes and other materials which are now readily available for all the employees. Work surfaces are also going to be changed. Some of the materials that were used in the past are porous and have seams. People are going to start going to seamless and non-porous materials. I know many of the larger leading furniture manufacturers are already working on this. Another change, which you've likely seen, or if not, you're going to see it, is adding plexiglass or separators. Many stores, banks, businesses are already implementing this. I went to a doctor recently and they had plexiglass stations all over the place. Soft, comfortable, collaborative seating will likely also be replaced with hard-surfaced, wipeable tables and chairs. Additionally, we're going to see storage on top of workspaces, eliminating personal items being put on the floor. And lastly, I've seen a lot of ads or emails about keyboard drawers or different drawers being integrated into stations to prevent people leaving keyboards or mouse on top of the workstation when it's not in use. So that's the end of our third topic. Do we have any possible questions about the workplace of the future and any of the changes we brought up? If not, we're going to be going over some of these again later, but I figured we'd pause for a second before we move on.
Yeah, there's a question about, you know, some of the things you brought up, like the sprays and the extra janitorial coming in and the sanitation sprays and whatnot. How already there seems to be a challenge getting those items. Do you see, I mean, this is for the small business, let alone imagine some of the corporate headquarters that are here. So do you see that becoming easier to obtain? Or are we still in the space of, you know, not being able to get these items to even open up?
Yeah, it's a case-by-case basis. People are being creative. I mean, we've seen distilleries, right, convert their use, and now they're making hand sanitizers. So there's definitely people re-engineering their businesses. Things certainly are challenging to obtain. I mean, I know from a personal standpoint, you know, you go to Publix or a store or Office Depot and you try to find antibacterial soap refills or wipes, and some of these things, even tissues sometimes are hard to find. So yes, it is challenging, but keep in mind, you know, we manage as a company some 2 billion square feet globally, and we have relationships with vendors. And I can say from experience, it's a little different when you call with a referral than you call off the internet. So I had a few clients call us and ask, I'm in 3 different spaces right now while my new space is being built out. I'm not comfortable with just having the issues or the items the landlord is cleaning. I want to have someone come into my space more regularly and do sprays, decontamination, regular wipe downs, and disinfecting. And we gave them the name of several vendors so that they can contact these folks. And it turns out these cleaning companies were already in the area cleaning larger buildings, so it was not a big deal for this company to have additional services, and you just pay a la carte. You know, if you want someone 3 days a week to come into your space, that's something you have to decide, because again, one size doesn't fit all. Every company has different needs and a different set of employees and a different set of concerns. So I think it will be easier to get some materials, but we have not experienced that with our clients yet. And luckily we've been able to get things done. You know, one of the interesting things, just a sidebar real quick, several buildings were using green materials. Green cleaning materials, unfortunately, are not hospital grade and cannot disinfect like hospital grade materials were. So I think the word green cleaning supplies is going to be pushed to the side for a little while people are more concerned about their health and their safety.
Wow, that's interesting. Wow.
Yep.
So there's another question. I'm sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
What do you see for the future of co-working or shared workspace? Which I'm sure you're going to get into, but.
Sure. Well, that's a whole nother topic. You know, we work with all their financial difficulties. I mean, at one point they were the largest tenant in New York City and a bunch of other markets. They're probably going to put a lot of their space on the market for sublease. So it's going to create some challenges in a lot of different marketplaces. But it's sort of a mixed bag, right? If we're telling people to socially distance and create new standards and new barriers and steps, I would think there's going to be a hesitancy by some people to avoid a shared workspace. One of the things I'm going to touch on is, even in a big company, there used to be some concept called hoteling. You would come into your office, you'd have your information would be on a rolling cart, and you would take whatever desktop is available for the day and then lock up your cart and go home. There have been studies and conclusions now that shared spaces is not very clean or safe. And do you really want to share a desk that someone else was sitting on before you got there, and who knows what they were doing and what precautions they were taking. So I think the trend for the short run is going to be caution. And everyone is different, right? If you need to move around and you're a sales manager, or you have a business and you have multiple offices and you need a touchdown space to use a conference room or something, I can see people using those for that kind of setup. But as a permanent setup to go in every day, I'm not so sure the majority of people are comfortable sitting in a desk and on a chair and using a phone and computer that other people are using regularly. So I think those are going to take a little hit financially, but in the long run, post-vaccine, it might be different. But in the short run, I think there's going to be a little hesitancy for some people to want to be in that kind of environment.
Totally makes sense. Thank you. All right,
No
let's keep going.
Okay, next slide. Let's talk about the results from the Colliers Global Work from Home Experiment. We call it an experiment because this was nothing that anyone signed up for or planned for, but it's something that we have. So right now, it's really undetermined if most folks truly enjoy working from home full-time, or if they want to keep it that way, or others are beyond ready to go back. So we put together a second poll. Let's take a second and see what the audience has to say about this one. All right, would you rather work from home full-time, get back to the office, or some hybrid?
I think it's, oh, I apologize.
We have to keep these simple. There's plenty of other options we could have given, and we could have been a little more specific, but this is just to take a little pulse of what the audience is thinking here. And then we'll share with you some statistics that we came up with, as well as the architectural firm came up with, which I think you'll find interesting. And some of it might be surprising. Okay, that sort of fits in line with what the numbers say. So let's get into the results here. Many companies should be able to reduce their footprints going forward, because it seems like a consistent number of people want to work from home at least one day a week. But other companies, might have to take a decentralized approach and need more space. For instance, if you're a manufacturing company, or if you have a plant and it's one building and you host executive offices, accounting, accounts payable, marketing, manufacturing, all these people may not be able to be in a building anymore. Could be too many demands. So a firm like that might need to decentralize. But if companies can now shift a portion, whether it's 10% or some higher number, that could be significant, because generally speaking, real estate is the second largest line item expense for most companies. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. So based on our survey, here are some of the key points we discovered. Next slide, please. We surveyed over 4,000 respondents, and this was still open. I don't think it's closed yet, and it's no surprise to me, but so far, around 70% of the folks want to continue working from home at least one day a week. However, there's still a work-life balance that can be challenging for some. Some folks, need more collaboration. Next slide, please. And some have issues with socialization, connectivity. I can tell you, I've dropped a number of calls in my house. Houses generally weren't set up with the same bandwidth that you have in your office. I mean, there's productivity issues, there's focus challenges, and one of the big issues is maintaining or creating a culture. Imagine if you're a new hire and you're starting a job and now you're remote and you have to check in with your manager or your teammates. I mean, how do you integrate somebody into that workplace? How do you maintain a culture? How do you create a culture? These are some of the reasons why working from home forever I don't think is going to be the normal. I've posted some things on LinkedIn, and there's some interesting studies that have been done, but socialization and connectivity is certainly a reason why I don't think people are going to remain isolated forever. And there was an interesting island off of Italy, and they have more than the norm for their occupants and inhabitants to live over 100. And they concluded the main reason was gathering in all these squares, and the interaction, the socialization have kept all these people, along with their diet, living over 100. I thought that was kind of interesting. Next slide, please. There's also some compliance issues that you have to think about. If you're a medical firm, you have HIPAA regulations, and other firms that share software. If people are doing it remotely, technically new licenses may be required. So those are additional expenses. You know, our survey concluded in the APAC region, they certainly had, you know, the biggest challenges with working from home. And you know, it's going to be studied and written about for years. Next slide, please. So different industries, you know, interact and relate differently based on, you know, working from home. Certain companies can, certain individuals have increased their productivity and have gotten more done in a typical workday than being in the office. And then there's the other extreme where if your kids are home or you have other challenges, it may not be as easy to be as productive. So it's sort of a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. Keep going. We talked about the work-life balances and some of the challenges. You know, people have always complained the commute time and all these other things have created hindrances on their family life, and this is certainly impacting, you know, work-life balance in some cases favorably and in some cases even unfavorably. Next slide, please. You know, connectivity. You know, I've been reasonably successful keeping up with my team and having, you know, regular chats, and, you know, there are some challenges at times, but for the most part, you know, my business is able to be conducted remotely, and I don't have some of the challenges that others have. However, you know, some may not be as lucky. Next slide, please. So what do people miss? You know, in-person collaboration, you know, innovation many times comes out because of those impromptu discussions and conversations. And when you're separated like this physically, certainly we might have a lack of some innovation going forward. Next slide, please. So, you know, every company is different. Everyone needs to think about, you know, what the normal is, what your new standards should be, how you're going to do things, what kind of leadership are you going to set examples for your employees, and your design of your space. You know, the majority of the major corporations we talked to and spoke with, they all feel that they're not going to be investing millions of dollars right now to modify or retrofit their portfolios globally. Rather than invest in new space and new furniture, they're going to implement a lot of the changes we talked about, you know, reducing the density, removing chairs, eliminating workstations, having different shifts, and changing their patterns rather than investing millions of dollars in capital to modify all their spaces. Next slide, please. So work practices, behaviors, you know, collaborating, you know, unspoken rules and densities, these all have to be optimized, studied, reviewed, and explored, because there's certainly a lot of things that need to be evaluated, and we certainly don't have all the answers, and new information is coming out every day. Next slide, please. You know, work, people have to reevaluate, you know, work and then figure out how to do things with either less, more, or the same square footage. You know, every situation is differently, and that's why everyone needs to really develop their own plan. Next slide, please. So clearly there's a call to action. People need to take responsibility, and people need to figure out what steps they're going to do immediately, and then shortly thereafter, and then possibly even long-term. You know, if you're in a situation and your lease contract is up in a year, there's some tough choices that need to be made, and certainly going through all these steps and processes will help enable you to get the advice you need to make informed choices. Let's go to the next slide, please. So our report is available. It is now published. And if anyone is interested in receiving our complete study, I just pulled a few of the slides from our report. Please send me an email and put Colliers work from home study in the subject line, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of our full report. I saw something pop up. There might possibly be a question before we move on to the fifth topic. Does anyone have any questions about our study and some of the trends? If not, we can go on and wait for the end to cover any other questions.
I think it was answered. Somebody had asked if the presentation will be available and is it okay to share? So,
yes.
Okay. And then I haven't, you had mentioned the leases coming up and, you know, these businesses are going to have to reevaluate now. Are you already seeing any of those things happening where businesses are not renewing leases, they're downsizing, they're working from home, you know, they're choosing to have their, you know, to downsize and have a percentage of their employees just permanently work from home? Are you seeing any of that?
Yeah, all across the board. Let me share a couple of real life examples. So we represent a Fortune 50 client here throughout the state of Florida, and we have transacted all classes of space for them: warehouses, call centers, office space, retail. They cover the full spectrum. We had a large transaction in Broward County that got canceled. Why? Because they have other space that they own that are underutilized, and now they're redeploying these people from building X now to spreading them out all throughout the county. So yes, there have been transactions that have been canceled. There have been transactions that have been reevaluated. People are trying to renew short term if that's an option. Some landlords are open to that, other landlords are not. But again, you know, another issue is viability. We recently had some talks and we've written pieces about the landlord tenant playbook, and depending upon if you've gotten rent relief or if you've been able and successful in getting proceeds through the CARES Act and the SBA, PPP loans and things along that nature, all of these pieces are all interrelated. So to answer your question, I have one client yesterday that committed to do a new 10-year deal. That's not the norm. I have other clients that are keeping transactions shorter term duration. I've had a few clients that have eliminated completely some of their requirements. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. And that's why this plan is so important. With all this uncertainty and everything else going on outside of business alone, it's just certainly making it real difficult for people to clearly make a choice and figure out which decision is the right one. And that's why our services and need of a resource, people need help, and people need someone that can spell out the different choices that exist out there, the features, the benefits, and sometimes the consequences of each. And that enables them to be in a position to be able to make those choices. Without having that knowledge, it's really difficult to navigate through some of these times that we're experiencing right now. It's crazy. So
Right.
yes, the question, we've seen everything, and I'm sure we haven't seen it all yet. You know, when someone starts a question, you're not going to believe this. I always say, try me, because I've heard some crazy things over the years. So go ahead.
There's another question from a member asking, is now a good time to look for commercial property if you're in the market, or should they hold for 90 days? And this person is, in particular, it's a smaller business, 1,000 to 3,000 square feet, but is now an actual, you know, a good time to be doing it?
Okay, so our data and our thoughts and my personal belief, I think we're going to see pressures on rents. I think there's a good chance that rents will come down over time. But bear in mind that rent is a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator. And more than likely, they're not going to fall as quickly as we all, as consumers of space or occupiers, would want. So this is a balancing act. You don't want to play musical chairs and not have an option. You know, I've had clients in the past tell me, oh, I have a year or 14 months left or 18 months left. It's too early. I don't want to start yet. And some of those same people keep kicking the can and waiting until it's 6 months out or less. And then unfortunately, you have no leverage, no options, and no time to get a build out done, yet alone go through the permitting process and everything else, which all take time. So the best advice is have a plan and start earlier than you think you need to start, because certainly in this uncertain time with all the challenges out there, it's going to be more difficult to transact and get things done than ever before. So if you had more than a year, I would maybe roll the dice, but inside a year, that to me is a little tricky. There's always one opportunity that surfaces to the top, and through positioning yourself properly as a sought after tenant, you can get the right people competing for your building, for your business, and thus find an opportunity that could be worthwhile for you to select and make a decision to move forward with. So I know that's a long answer, but based on what you've told me and what I know so far, I would probably recommend doing something sooner versus later.
All right. Thank you.
Right.
All right, let's go. We're done with questions for now, so let's keep going on with your presentation.
Perfect. So let's talk about the Gensler study. Gensler is a large leading global architectural firm. So they surveyed 2,300 anonymous U.S. workers, and they talked about immediate actions, things ongoing caused by the pandemic, and then a reimagined future. So let's go to the next slide and talk about what they found. So interesting, the employees that they surveyed, only about 10% of them had prior work from home experience pre-COVID. Most people did not do it regularly and were not familiar with this experiment that we were all faced with. Next slide. Approximately 12% of the people they surveyed want to work from home full time, but most of the people want to return to work. 70%, at least 70% want to work from home with some crucial changes. What are those changes? More space, social distancing. The benefit of social distancing also helps with noise and other disruptions. And assigned permanent spaces was one of the things that their folks, the workers, said, they didn't want a temporary desk or an unassigned desk, getting back to a shared workspace environment or hoteling. Next slide, please. This was sort of interesting, and I've gotten some pushback on this when I've had conversations with people. And again, I'm the messenger. I'm just delaying the results. I didn't write this. But the conclusion was the younger generations are less productive at home, and they're less satisfied with the work from home experience. And nowadays, millennials are greater than 50% of the workforce, and they generally don't work well from home. They have certain needs and wants. They like social action. They like being involved in corporations that give back and have a culture, and they want to be part of something bigger. So they identify with that kind of purpose. Work from home doesn't provide that for the younger generation. So let's go to the next slide. People expect, the return to have a different feel. The workplace is going to be different. It's going to have more space. There's going to be more cleaning, stricter, probably sick policies, flexible hours, less desk sharing, and increased support for mobile and virtual work. Workspaces are going to have to adapt for each different set of challenges and issues, because no two are generally alike. Next slide, please. They've outlined, a four-step process to go back, and approximately 25%, go back in phase one, having a phased approach. Next slide, please. So again, dealing off the cuff is not going to work successfully in this situation. There's too many things that can go wrong. There's stuff that we need to do immediately, pre-vaccine, and then leading towards, the reimagined future post-vaccine. Next slide, please. There are health issues, wellness issues, and safety are all now priorities for getting back to the workplace and safely. Next slide, please. What we do, how we do it, more outside spaces. You're going to see buildings offer different types of amenities perhaps going forward. There's going to be, a lot of changes that, are going to be taking place. Interesting. Next slide, please. New information, as I said, is coming out daily. But right now, there's certainly a focus by many on hygiene and distancing. And the workplace in the future is going to have to incorporate all this stuff as well. Next slide, please. There are new guidelines for space that are emerging. And as I said earlier, there's going to be a shift from more densely populated spaces to something less dense, like when I started in business, when it was closer to 250 square feet per person. And again, that does not include just your physical office itself. There's a reception area, there's circulation in hallways, there's a conference room, a break room. So that ratio includes all those non-office places where you get to share as well. Next slide, please. That summarizes the Gensler study. If there are no questions about any of those topics, let's talk about the last topic before we run out of time here. And these are the Colliers re-entry recommendations.
Absolutely. Let's get right into it.
Many landlords and tenants are still unclear about some of the steps or all the steps needed for re-entry. Colliers, being one of the largest publicly traded global commercial real estate firms, is positioned as a resource and advisor as we manage over 2 billion square feet and completed over 129 billion in transactions in 2019. Additionally, over the last 90 days, we picked up 17 million square feet as many smaller firms or owners that have been trying to self-manage their properties in the past have decided that additional resources are required to move forward successfully. And Sarah, that touches on your point earlier about being able to obtain the cleaning supplies and have the information and the workers that can implement the changes that are needed to the air conditioning and some of the other technological issues that are needed to run a building successfully. So here are some of the recommendations that we have put out to clients. Let's go to the next slide. So some of the items you're going to see here, I mentioned earlier on, but certainly different agencies are making certain recommendations. And again, this goes back to leading by example and having certain things available for your employees. So sanitation stations, wipes are going to certainly be the norm. I know the manufacturers are doing everything possible to keep up with demand, but that's certainly been a challenge. Next slide, please. You're going to see more people trying to attend to public areas, trying to limit the number of people that go into restrooms at a time, and trying to prevent the spread of germs. So it's not going to be uncommon in certain buildings to see perhaps more frequently a day porter if the building is large enough and can warrant it. If it's not, if you're in a one-story building and you walk into your own space, these are things you're going to have to consider doing yourself. Next slide, please. Again, you can see on the right, the doors, there's now arrows, one direction. They're trying to limit the flow of traffic. Next slide, please. Again, you're going to see other barriers. All the way on the right, the nanoseptic stickers. It's kind of interesting. These go on handles, and there's some technology in there that they actually clean themselves, which is kind of interesting. Next slide, please. Greater signage, plexiglass shields. You know, it's out there and it's becoming the new norm. I would imagine if you're in the plexiglass business or a handy person, you can certainly make a lot of money going out there and installing these things on booths and counters and all over. Next slide, please. Again, just some examples of what's going on to help direct people. Next slide, please. This is interesting in the elevators. One of the things I heard on a call in larger buildings, and I heard an example, it was from Buckhead, Atlanta. Some of you might be familiar with Atlanta. Somebody waited an hour and 20 minutes to get from the 45th floor of their building into the parking garage. Why? Because every time the elevator passed, there were too many people and you were not allowed in. So one of the things I've read about and heard about is making a reservation and being required to have a reservation to get in and up into your space, and on the return out of your space and get home at night. So can you imagine waiting in line or having a reservation now? And again, in the short run, these things may happen. Additionally, stairwells in buildings. There are companies and management companies directing people to use the stairwells, but again, non-emergency use, one direction up, one direction down. So you're going to see some of these changes as well. It's going to be interesting. Next slide, please. This is what I was talking about earlier, plexiglass to separate, keep people distance, eliminate workstations, remove chairs from conference room tables. These are all steps that can be taken easily with little or no cost to help instill that culture of cleanliness, mindfulness, and just looking out for your employees and making them feel better about coming back to the workplace. Next slide, please. Again, different signage, keeping doors open. That's another thing. It helps you show that people are in the room and could also help prevent spreading. And Zoom meetings. Just because you go back to the office, that doesn't mean you have to stop doing these meetings. These meetings have become very useful, and they should continue going forward. It's safer for everybody to minimize the direct contact with large groups. I mean, the CDC has been putting out there no more than 10. I don't know if any of you saw, but there were 16 folks that went to a celebration, went to a bar, put their guard down. It happened to be in Florida, and all 16 of them now have COVID. So you have to be mindful of what's going on out there, and certainly Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all these other technology tools should be continued to be used going forward. Next slide, please. Again, putting directional for pathways. You don't want people bumping into each other. In the old days, you wouldn't care if people went left or right. Now you want to have circulation, and that will help keep distancing and keep people safe. Next slide, please. Stickers, they're going to be all over the place, gathering around people's desks, the coffee pot, the copier, those things have to stop. Next slide, please. Thermometers, scanning, interesting stuff we're going to see here. Skype, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, like I mentioned. Next slide. Janitorial, as I said earlier, there's a shift from green cleaning supplies to sterile hospital, stronger stuff, and that's probably going to be the norm for a while, and keeping these places clean as possible and limiting the number of people, touchless this and touchless that certainly makes a lot of sense, and certainly something that should be explored. Next slide, please. How you get in, how you get out, stationless attendance, automated. Obviously, those things are going to need to be attended to and wiped down and cleaned. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so lastly, I want to talk about air conditioning. So I read something recently that when the pandemic hit China, many of the buildings, they shut down the air conditioning immediately to stop the spread. And I'm not sure that's the answer, especially in South Florida during the summertime, but that's an extreme that can be taken and has been taken. But certainly there's been a lot of research done. I know our firm has been busy presenting findings to managers and building owners regarding air conditioning systems and other things. And I've taken a few of the highlights and key items here. So, there's lots of things that can be done. Some of them are low or no cost, and some of them certainly could add, as I mentioned earlier, up to $1 a square foot to the operating expenses. But some of the things you might hear about or see is disabling of demand controlled ventilation. You know, these things have sensors and they can start blowing more air when it's not necessary, and it could spread certain biogens. Better filtrations to kill pathogens. There are different standards out there. HEPA filtration is certainly one of the best, but you're going to see people put in different filtration. The problem is that can impact the balancing of your system, require the fans to blow more, and that could, again, increase costs. But these are things that need to be explored with a HVAC contractor. UV GI lights, ultraviolet germicidal irradiation. There's going to be different kind of technologies used and invented. Simply, additionally, increase fresh air circulation. You know, in your car too, you want to think about that. Instead of keeping the same air recycling, you want more fresh air. Again, trade-off is you're going to get higher humidity levels. You want humidity not to exceed 60%. And, you know, the cost of your AC could go up, but it's something to think about. Additionally, some industry experts have recommended running the AC 24/7. But, you know, there are consequences and challenges associated with many of these alternatives. You know, the majority of these HVAC systems are designed with non-HEPA or ultraviolet filtration. So to modify them or retrofit them could be a challenge, and certainly, depending on the age of the systems, it may not be available. That is our final item. Before I sum up what we covered and give my closing remarks, are there any questions about any of this stuff that we covered?
There was one about the nano stickers and how they work, but I know we're running out of time, so to me, it sounds like that could probably be an entire biology.
Absolutely. I would say I would refer you to their website, because I wouldn't even dare take a stab at trying to explain that, because that's not in my wheelhouse.
All right, so let's wrap it up.
Okay, so I mean, certainly I appreciate everyone's, you know, attending this virtual session. You know, certainly due to the format today, there wasn't enough time to take a deeper dive into subject matter. And as Sarah just said, you can probably spend hours on stickers or HVAC or signage or, you know, furniture alone. But my goal was to give you a few items to think about, but you can certainly feel free to reach out to me directly with any specific questions so we can review your situation and I can further advise you on this matter. You know, here's what I said we were going to cover today: how to re-enter the workplace safely and protect the health and well-being of your employees, along with insights on the key changes to the workplace during a pandemic and how you can be the big winner in these uncertain times by having a plan and being better prepared. Here's why it's important to you. Your plan is really your ticket to safety in light of this uncertainty and being better prepared for when we get to the other side of this. So here's what we covered: the impact of social distancing on office space, what's happening to your space and what's needed prior to going back, the workplace of the future and what changes should be implemented, the results from the Colliers Global Work from Home Study, some select results from the Gensler survey, and then re-entry recommendations. You know, heading into one or multiple crises simultaneously, it has unforeseen risks for any tenant. But if you take responsibility, and I know you guys can do it, and, you know, commit to doing a plan, I can commit to helping you, and I know you guys can be the winner here. And we're all certainly hoping for the best, but you have to be prepared for anything less. So I invite you to email me with any questions so I can fully respond and help you with your plan. And if you know anyone else that should have the opportunity to have a conversation with me, have them give me a call or reach out to me too. I promise to offer creative solutions and sound advice during this uncertain time. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I'm clapping. That was unbelievable. Let me start my video here. So like I had said, I've had the privilege of you know, talking with you throughout this process since it first started and then throughout, and you've been definitely this expert, you know, advice person that I've had the opportunity to speak with. So I appreciate you sharing that with our members. We will share your information with everyone that attended. So we'll send an email follow-up. So if people didn't catch the email address, we'll make sure they get it, okay? Other than that, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. And we do have a virtual meeting tomorrow. It's our Successful Women in Business lunch that we usually have each month. It's going to start a little earlier at 11:30, and Dr. Ava Parker with Palm Beach State is our speaker. And, you know, a little secret is, gentlemen, you know, it might be noticed if you show up to a Successful Women in Business lunch in the past, but now that it's a Zoom meeting, you are welcome to come as well. So, you know, make sure you go on our calendar and check that out. And then lastly, we do have our app. If you haven't downloaded the app yet, please download our app. We've spent a lot of time making it flawless, well, hopefully flawless, and certainly has all of our events and all of the different members' contact information for you, and right at your fingertips. So thank you all. Stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you, Bob, again for taking the time, and I will Zoom you next time. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.